Welcome to Project Liberal episode 4, I believe.
I think so.
Episode 4. We've been doing this for a while. My name's Josh Shekel. I'm the co-founder of Project Liberal. I'm joined here as usual by my co-host, Jonathan Casey.
Hello, hello.
Hello, Jonathan. And today we are doing a couple things. So we have Warren Rhea joining us, and I'll give a bio introduction about him in a second. But we're going to try a new model. In the last couple episodes, we've been very focused on having an expert and interviewing the expert about a very specific topic. And today we're going to try to make it a little bit more conversational, a little bit more fun, talk about some big high-level ideas related to liberalism. And that's why I'm very glad and excited to invite our guest, Warren Rhea. And Warren, I kind of pulled a bio out of thin air for you, so feel free to correct this. But I've seen you describe yourself as a political commentator. You're also an American attorney who practices law in the energy industry. I know you do streaming as well. I know that you, at one point, the neoliberals elected you the chief neoliberal shill. We'll have to figure out what that means. I'm not sure what that means.
It was big. It was quite an honor. I got to say, it was certainly the highest honor of my commentating career, such as it is.
They have a bracket for that, right?
They do a yearly bracket where they, it was sort of tongue-in-cheek to deal with at the time, all of these socialists who would call anybody to the left of, or I guess anybody to the right, rather, of Lenin and Stalin, neoliberal show. And so they decided to make a bracket out of it. So it was a lot of fun.
I love it. Do they only elect one a year?
Yes, and you serve for one term, and you get there hopefully by Twitter posting, and you spend a year Twitter posting. So it's not the highest demand office, but it was fun. And the current fellow, Matt Darling, is also a lot of fun too. He's great. He's a real deal show. He works at a think tank. He does a lot of really cool policy work. Matthew Darling, I highly encourage you to check out his work.
Matthew Darling, I'll have to check him out. So that was for the Neoliberal Project, or I guess it was the Center for New Liberalism is what they go by, that election every year. Okay, gotcha. So I think, just to frame everything, I know that you're a big advocate, a self-described advocate for liberty, open society, the Constitution, a lot of those things that are related to liberal thought. I find it interesting because I think that we might have kind of multiple unique perspectives on this podcast. So first and foremost, I know you describe yourself as a neoliberal, being the chief neoliberal shill. I think we describe ourselves, Jonathan, not speak for you, but more kind of classical liberals. And I think that those two unique perspectives, I actually don't think those ideologies or those concepts are very far apart by any means. I think there's some distinctions, and those are the kind of things that I'd like to discuss. But I think that we'll have a pretty interesting conversation. So without further ado, why don't we just kick it off with that question? So you were the chief neoliberal shill, or at least were a couple years ago.
Or although I refer to myself as emeritus because it was so much fun.
Noted. So how do you describe neoliberalism for somebody who asks? Like, what does that mean to you?
Well, it's an interesting question because I suppose today, in practice, the neoliberal project, which is gradually becoming the center for a new liberalism, is increasingly sort of basically center-left Democrats. And it's an interesting, I don't presume to speak for them, the shill contest was kind of a fun Twitter poll project, but I don't presume to speak for them or anything. But in my view, the way that I think about it is the liberal tradition was very much on one track from, I suppose, the time of the early 19th century to the calamities of the early 20th century, right? And in the face of the rising tide of collectivism in the 1930s, there were some who said, look, we are still believers in the old ideas, but we feel like we've got to take on some of the reins of greater state power in order to fend off the unabashed, shameless state power of rising collectivism on the left and on the right. Yep. So I suppose, I don't know that there are too many people who genuinely will call themselves neoliberals, but I think that the general idea of it is that you believe in a free society and the maintenance of those institutions, which perhaps in a perfect world you might not want to spend all that much time and money on, like I suppose the military, regulations for the banking sector, a lot of social welfare programs that maybe you might think, okay, well, the arguments for this on principle are often based on practicality as well. Maybe it is the case, for example, that I'm not a big fan of the bailout of the banks, even though, of course, in practice, it ended up making the United States government money. Maybe I think still ideologically, look, that's just not the role of government. Government has no place in doing that. Well, maybe so, but at the same time, it's important to protect liberal society such as it can actually exist in our fallen world. That's a reference to ideas like original sin and all that. Mankind is perfect.
I grew up an evangelical, and so I completely understood the reference.
Every time, I used to say stuff like that. Sometimes people say, "Wow, are you some kind of right winger or something?" No, just mankind, perfect nature.
We've got all these things from different influences. May as well use them.
Yeah,
right.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so we try and meet that nature where it exists, and we say, look, we want to try and tailor programs so that we can meet people's real needs, like a functional economy that can survive crises, and to that extent, occasionally we'll make compromises with the use of state power toward those greater ends. But at the same time, I think it is also something that in its proper form involves a healthy distrust of the ability of state power to do things like to plan the economy. Although, of course, there are those who would say, well, your central bank is a kind of economic planning in a very real sense. And what you would say, that's probably true. It's just that, you have to deal with the political circumstances as they exist. The public does not want the, sort of boom bust economic cycles of the past. They are very politically problematic in practice. They cause a lot of other terrible consequences, none of which seem to lead to freer societies, only more unfree societies. And therefore, for example, you end up with a degree of economic planning. Something I find important, but which I think is nevertheless better, at least theoretically important.
Yeah.
I think it's better than the alternative, which seems to be just about everywhere and always much more intensive economic planning and control of people's economic lives and reduction of their individual liberties. So that's just kind of one example.
Yeah.
But that's the idea, trying to reconcile with the fact that, have you ever heard of Wagner's Law?
I don't think so. No.
It's kind of interesting. I mean, it's one of those laws that's, it's not a true law, but it's a description of a phenomenon, which is that in prosperous societies, the percentage of the economy that ends up being consumed by the government in GDP continually increases. The United States is lower than, say, Europe, but it's still much higher than, say, a developing country, and not that far apart from Europe, as we might sometimes imagine. In fact, sometimes the United States has higher tax rates than European countries. Not often, but when it comes to the richest people or corporations, sometimes it does. And the idea is that as a population gets richer, they want more money to be put into government expenditure. And it seems to be true that the public wants more public services. And I imagine the three of us would find some, would take some issue with what many people might view as an unalloyed good, public expenditure for social services. Might say, well, hold on now, there's some problems with that.
Yeah,
that's not government's proper function. But it is overwhelmingly the public's demand in industrialized countries all over the world, with cultures as far apart as, say, Japan and France. I mean, the pattern tends to hold. Now, it's not an ironclad law or anything, but it's something that something about modernity that we have to reckon with and figure out how to deal with. Because so far, folks like, say, Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, who are typically called neoliberal, but are now, of course, typically disavowed by the Project Neoliberals. I'm not disavowing either of them. But it's a complex issue. Folks like that, though, I mean, they were able to arrest the growth of the state, but not much in the way of true reversal, really.
Right.
Yeah. Margaret Thatcher much more so than Reagan.
I was going to say Reagan expanded a lot of things about government. Yeah. But kind of back to your point about this law. One of the arguments I make is that as we get wealthier, as we increase our wealth, the burden of government is actually going down. Sure, we're taxed at much higher rates than we were 100, 200 years ago. But the actual burden, the actual cost to people is quite a bit lower, simply because our wealth has expanded so much greater than what it was in the past. So while our average tax rate is 30, 40, even 50% in the West, it's actually less than when it was, 2, 3, 4, 5%, because we have so much more wealth now than we did. So the burden of government is less, even though we're taxed quite a bit at a higher rate. And so I think that we fall into a modernity. We've fallen into we kind of ignore the actual problems with these growing tax rates, because the burden is perceptionally is less.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I hadn't thought about that, because like you're saying that the burden is relatively less, even if the rate is higher. The burden is less because you're working with a much larger pie.
Exactly. If you're a subsistence farmer in 1700s, 1800s, Kansas, if you're being taxed at 1 or 2%, that's a large cut to your actual income. Yeah. Whereas now, if you're working, you're working a salary of $60,000 a year. You're even if you're taxed at 50%, which you're not. I don't know exactly the tax bracket, but even if you're taxed at 50% there, $30,000, the GDP value of that worldwide is 10 times the average worldwide salary, right? Yeah. So I think in the West and in developed countries, we've got this sense that the burden of government is less, even though the tax is higher. So I don't know if that explains all of it. I think it explains some of it.
Well, it's something that this is something I see sometimes in libertarian circles as a claim that the average American was actually freer prior to the American Revolution.
Yeah, which is
it's one of those things where, first of all, not to go all woke on you, but of course that claim only really applies to that share of the population to which we all belong. But apart from that, because that's not really the thrust of the argument anyway. The main thrust of the argument is taxes and government control and interference in your life. And that's something that the tax burden issue, like you said, it's a relative share of a larger part. Also, of course, the not insignificant part that the taxes were all levied by authorities to which the colonists had no say. It is a not insignificant part,
right.
But they did say that was a huge part of it, right? They weren't typically complaining about the levies. They were complaining about the principle of it and the way that the principle worked out. And then that last part, I guess, that government had, it had no restraints what the government could do, and certainly the powers of the individual over other individuals, which were in essence blessed by the state, not just like, for example, slavery, but the degree to which ordinary people could kind of meddle in other people's lives without consequence. Freedom of speech, for example. The idea that there was such a thing in fashion that we were able to really count on it. Although I will say sometimes I do derive some satisfaction when I think about how crazy politics is now. You look back at the kind of things that people writing in political newspapers back in 1780s, 90s.
It was pretty rowdy, man. Honestly,
rowdy.
Politics hasn't really changed that much when you look at it. We have different mediums to discuss these things, and it maybe feels more pressing and oppressive. Yeah. Maybe it's more in your face than it may have been 250 years ago. But these fights, the nastiness of it, that's not anything new.
That I will say. Yeah, in fact, it seems like there was this period. I don't presume to be an expert on media history, but from what I've been able to glean, it seems to be the case that sometime in the around World War II. Media, the centralization of media as such, not by, as far as I can tell, some central plan, but just the economics of it, was such that, then you had things like the Fairness Doctrine, I guess, but the economics of it were such that you'd have these big, large media institutions that all followed a certain kind of path, and you had a lot of, I guess, local newspapers that all, for whatever reason, local media that for whatever reason, for example, would do things like refuse to report on JFK's affairs. Not because the Kennedy administration had a gun there, just a cultural thing. It just seemed like for a period of time, a few decades, like maybe 40 years, the news media was really something different, I guess, than the ordinary, which is a lot closer to today, it seems like.
I wonder if that's more the audience has changed, or maybe we're more comfortable with those types of subjects, right? It's a weird. There is a weird shift in the media. You had, up until, like you said, around World War II, you had the kind of the respectable media, or at least the perception of respectable media, when in reality they were covering up a lot of things.
Well, I'm saying something slightly different, which is that for a period between World War II and I don't know when it ended, but for a few decades,
the 80s.
Yeah, maybe so.
Yeah,
there was a lot of that respect and belief, but prior to that, it was like people were pretty vicious. I mean,
listen, the founding fathers would write anonymously to newsletters, calling each other horrifically awful things.
There you go.
I think I looked up something I once read about one of them calling the other a hermaphroditical character, things that just really nasty at each other.
Yes.
And one of the things I did want to bring up with you today was talking about just how we've gotten our politics feels like it's much more vitriolic than it has been in the past.
Yeah.
And I wonder what you think of the role, because you kind of you've built up an audience in the social media era. You've seen a lot of this. And one of the things I appreciate about you is that you haven't let the doomerism or the hate kind of seep in that feels like so many influencers have let happen. So I'm kind of wondering, what's your perspective on that? Why have you been able to avoid it? Why is it seeming so prevalent?
Well, I will say that I think a huge reason why I have been able to avoid it is that this is just something I do for fun, and it's not really a job, man. I don't really make any money off of it.
Oh, you're not getting paid by Elon Musk?
I did actually just register for the monetization thing because they sent an email saying, hey, you're accruing revenue. You're leaving it on the table. I was like, well, I mean, if I'm accruing revenue. But I was thinking, I don't think so, though, because my engagement lately has just been terrible. So I don't think I'm actually. But the email said there's revenue that is accruing, not just potential. But and I checked, and it was like, what is this? This is you lied. I'm getting a goose egg here from Elon Musk.
You got to wait till the next interval, not to get off the tangent, but they drop it in intervals. And so the next interval, you're going to get more than other people will.
Okay. All right. Well, that's not. Well, I'm excited. Thank you.
Yeah, there you go.
But I mean, it's like it's relative still. There's not that. Like you got to be. Who's that guy? Guy from Malaysia who's always
Ian Shaw.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and he was posting. Oh, I get $10,000 a month off of Twitter or X. As it's called.
Yeah.
The name that will never quite stick. It's
It feels like such an incentive for disinformation, for
exactly
the type of bad content that you worry about.
It was always. I think that was always kind of there. Like the difference I think now is I guess the monetization is much more direct, whereas previously Twitter was like a thing that the incentive was the dopamine hit immediately, and then also the you could then take people and say, hey, come do my thing where you give me money. Or come, go to this website to just give me money or whatever. Now, I guess Twitter can be the money. I don't know how much that changes. I'm sure it changes it somewhat because, like people have said, there's a lot more Facebook type content on Twitter now. But
definitely. Okay. So, the algorithms I think are a big part of the reason why. I mean, it's like you get incentivized by being, in many cases, by spreading misinformation, by being really bombastic, and by being really controversial. And I think that's an incentive. But are you saying your reason that you have not fallen into the trap is because you just don't give a shit? Is that
well, I mean, because I'm not saying that because I'm a good person. I'm saying because I have a day job and this is something I do for fun. And I mean, if it were my job, I think I'd feel very different. Because I of course think that I would be not like other girls.
Of course,
but I think the incentives would be very different because at that point, unless you have cultivated an audience where it's like, no, we are the opposite of that. Which is something you can do. I mean, hopefully it's something like you guys are trying to do.
Sure.
But. For the most part, though, I think it is a little tougher. I think perhaps because it is just so easy to just kind of focus on I need to just engineer this to be as compelling as possible. And I mean, nobody's going to check. Nobody really cares if it's true or not. If it really kind of matches up and lines up. I mean, most people are. I mean, it's got to be really egregious before the profit and loss is of lying or just making something up or whatever. So I mean, that is there. I don't. I mean, it's and that's tough to deal with because it can come across like you're saying, well, that just means the people are not interested in our arguments. And there is, I don't think I'd be saying that. I think there's also a sense among, I guess, establishmentarian types, which I would call myself. I'm not calling you all that, but people who are like, no, things, we're always a lot of good stuff going on, and we should change some things, but we shouldn't throw the whole, shouldn't burn it all down and start over. I think there is I listened to this great talk the other day where the fellow said, it was this British politician whose name escapes me. I'll look him up later, but he was saying that liberals sort of lost some of the fire in the belly belief, energy to defend their own ideas, which there may be something to, they're not challenged for a long time and they're accepted. Suddenly a movement comes out to just kind of thrash everything. It can become, it can be hard to meet it on its own terms. So I think there's also some of that. There's, I think the pendulum is swinging the other way. People are sort of wising up to the scope of the challenge to free societies and are kind of changing their tactics. But at least for a long time, it's tough.
I think you're speaking to something that both Jonathan and I think about a lot. Right. Is in a way I don't know how it feels to you, but at least to me, being in, from my perspective, watching all this play out over the last decade to a decade and a half, it feels like that kind of liberal world order it's been on a pedestal for so long in the 20th century. In my childhood growing up, it has really been challenged and knocked down by extremists, and not even extremists just on the right. Like a lot of people in the Democratic Party would say it's just the Republicans, but it's also extremists on the left. It's like some really radical, far left individuals that are challenging that within the DNC. They have less influence. Obviously, the GOP is completely run by these populists and these illiberal individuals. But it feels to me like somebody has to go to war with them. Yeah, and again, change the tactics. You can't expect to fight for liberalism through these. You've got to really think about new ways to address these narratives, and that's kind of what we're trying to do with this project. Is really fight them on their own turf, but like turn that logic against them in a way that that resonates with people.
I think that one of the easiest traps a political movement, philosophy, whatever can fall into is this idea that, well, we are morally correct, so we don't need to argue, we don't need to defend what we believe because, well, we're right, we're superior, we're better than them, we're morally correct and morally justified, so we don't need to defend our views. And I think that this happens on the left and the right, but I think recently the left has certainly kind of fallen more into it than others. On the right, it seems like they've kind of gone the opposite way, where they're like, we're fine with being the immoral people, right? Well, you call us immoral, you call us despicable, we'll own that title, right? Yeah. So they've kind of got the opposite, the reverse mirror image problem with it right now. And I think that there is an appetite for something other than those two things, for a rigorous discussion of ideas. I'm curious.
Twitter isn't real life. The vast majority of people actually really resonate with the ideas that I think we all kind of collectively share here. And they let these extreme voices in our media and our social media define the narrative, and it really pisses me off.
I think you're right. Although I would say one of the things to be concerned about in the future is that it does feel like one drop at a time, Twitter is leaking into real life. But for the time being, I agree. Twitter is not real life.
Well, and when I say that, I mean the vast majority of people aren't really paying attention to what's going on in Twitter. Twitter does have a real life impact. I mean, it's arguable that without Twitter, Donald Trump may not have even won the 2016 presidential election, and this never would have happened. But it's like, I'm sick and tired of seeing the extreme voices monopolize the conversation, and no one really truly challenging that, as Jonathan mentioned a second ago, on the liberal side, which I think you guys at the Neoliberal Project are actually doing very well. Or not you guys, but you know what I mean. The crew there.
Yeah, I like how they were sort of early on, I think, in their own way, just sort of like, okay, how do we deal with these sort of attacks from the left all the time? And it's a lot of it was sort of respond tongue in cheek, a lot. In fact, some similar tactics, although different from them, like the idea of using ridicule as a tactic, for example, but not in a way that is quite so just like terrible. Yeah. But in ways that are still nevertheless, there is some real utility there in the sense of highlighting bad ideas, but also hopefully in ways that don't make you feel like gross afterward. Yeah. So there's and they've done a lot of interesting stuff. So again, I don't presume to speak for them, but I do really admire the work that they've done for
basically. They created the Dark Brandon meme. They
can
put that on. They can at least put that on their resume.
Yeah,
that alone is hilarious to me.
Whoever got Biden to actually buy into that, I don't know who had that conversation, but hey. Yeah. Listen, that was a slight miracle in and of itself. One thing I did want to ask you is, where do you see the differences between kind of neoliberalism and classical liberalism? Kind of how where's the dividing line? What do you think? Because I have my opinions on where the dividing line is, but I'm curious, what do you think?
Well, I would guess first, probably the Federal Reserve, which I don't quite know. I wouldn't presume to be an expert on it, but it does seem like many libertarians are very, quite. It is. I shouldn't say libertarians because I know that's a. Well, like even today's term means a lot.
Yeah, it's not even classical liberal.
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, but there are a lot of folks who would, I'd say, liberty oriented, who look at an institution like that and say, just like, look, I don't care whether it has, whether you're saying it leaves us better off. I mean, that is a ridiculous use of state power. It's not even democratic. I mean, it's it's vested with incredible authority, to regulate the economy in ways that are just vast and far-reaching. To which I would say, probably, hey, but at the same time, we've seen the alternatives, and the alternatives are just not great. So, we live here in the United States in what is still, I would argue, the freest society in the world, and we got to figure out how to roll back state power. But if a central bank of some sort is necessary, I wouldn't presume to be an expert, but it seems to be the case. Then is what it is. But I think maybe even the bigger one, and I don't say that's not just the issue, although I single it out because it does really seem to drive a lot of feeling. It's just the example of what I just said. What I imagine strike many people is just unprincipled nonsense. But at the same time, you deal with the world as it is, and utopia seems to be very far away. But, we can think about ways, how to make the government more accountable, how to get the government less involved in the economy without, going full tilt in the name of principle. So that's one thing. Maybe a bigger issue. I'm not sure if it would be bigger or not. Many people really do seem to be animated by the Federal Reserve. But maybe a bigger issue would be the military, which, I guess over the last year and a half, I just really, ever since the Russian invasion, I really have had nothing but good things to say about American commitment to national defense. But many people would quite rightly, not just national defense, but defense of international order. Many people though would say, one, the military may be the government's business, but and maybe one of the few things we'd argue the government should do. But this isn't an empire. This isn't. This is not what the founding fathers envisioned. This is not necessary for a free society. In fact, this is deleterious to a free society. Have created a sort of, a military that is itself too enmeshed in civil government. I'm not to be silly, but folks talking about the woke military, but other folks who are sometimes, concerned about the prospect of, say, military getting involved in politics at a high level. I don't want to speak out of turn, but people who are concerned that the military just has too much influence in political life. Okay. And of course, who are concerned about the fact that the military was also engaged in two wars, that Afghanistan and Iraq, that caused immense human suffering with arguably little to show for it, and which, I would imagine the greatest sin in both of those cases is that it doesn't feel like we won. I think that's what most people are upset about. But in any event, those are things to really be upset about, or to be concerned about, which I typically would say, yes, I share your sentiments, but at the same time, we are the only democracy in the world capable of defending itself in a real way, I suppose, other than maybe India, although it never seems to get better of its exchanges with China. But, the only democracy in the world, maybe France too. And I'm being a little expansive here, but
sure.
One of the only democracies in the world capable of defending itself, and certainly the only one capable of defending others. And that's a good thing. A freer world, a world where free societies have greater security, can collaborate, can work together, can trade freely, uninterrupted, can speak freely, uninterrupted, without fear of violent retaliation from foreign states. These are good things, and unfortunately, because our rivals are so tenacious, sometimes we get to spend upwards of nearly $1 trillion a year on defense because they're spending. They hide their budgets in different ways. A lot of that trillion, for example, is retirement and medical care for our men and women in the armed forces, but they don't. Maybe they're not doing that in Russia and China, but the fact is they're spending a lot. They are sophisticated rivals. We have to keep up because at the end of the day, this is existential stuff. So we want freedom to endure. We have to make those investments and recognize the political risks while nevertheless also recognizing the necessity. Trying to square those. So those are two big differences, I would imagine.
Makes sense. And a lot of the things that you describe, I see as more characteristics of kind of like anarcho-capitalists or boilerplate libertarian thought, whereas classical liberalism, I think, is a subset of the libertarian umbrella. But the word libertarian is becoming to mean something very different. At least it feels like in the last couple of years. Jonathan has an interesting way that he articulates the difference between the two, and I am interested. I want to hear Jonathan's chime in on this. But I was going to say one of the things that I think personally I see as the major difference, and maybe Jonathan, this is kind of what you're going. I might screw this up, but I feel like neoliberals are a lot more ontological. They're focused with reality and what's the real outcomes. Whereas I feel like classical liberals and even libertarians to some degree are the opposite in the sense that they're more deontological. They're more focused on ideas and ethics and values, and the outcomes are kind of secondary to that. They put those things in different priorities. So I think there's a lot more to it to unpack. But Jonathan, I know I cut you off.
Yeah.
No, I think I was trying to remember exactly how I put it to you the other day, but I do think that classical liberals put the outcome of freedom first, and I think neoliberals try to balance that out with economic or other concerns, right? And I think the classical liberals are a little bit more focused on that central idea of that freedom is what is to be valued and aimed for, where in economics is an outcome, good prosperity and development are an outcome of the freedom. Whereas I think that sometimes neoliberals kind of switch that order and they say that, okay, we need to achieve economic liberty or economic success, leading to more liberty.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of people who are quite willing to throw out really old principles, most of them at least, if they say, here's a graph that shows that, here's some good outcomes. So that just is what it is. And as Margaret Thatcher would say, there is no alternative. And I'm definitely a big Margaret Thatcher fan. So I'm not it's one I feel like significantly. Another reason I try and spell out that I don't speak for the neoliberal project is I feel significantly to the right. I think sometimes of my good friends over there, but it's I think you put it well. I guess I will only say this, Josh, and you, John, as well. Is I have the. I feel like I agree with the idea that freedom is an end in itself to be valued for its own sake, and that the outcomes really should be secondary. If I have my way, I might have a different society in some ways than the one I advocate. I don't know that if I had my way, I would, because I guess I like some of the things. Maybe it's worth it to me. I don't know. I'd have to think about the specifics here, but generally, I might feel that way too. I get the sense that, if we had sustained inflation for, say, 4 years or 8 years, we would get some pretty terrifying government that would have no interest in liberty of any sort. And if there are ways we can restrain this stuff, we've got to think about it in the sense of not trying to just ensure better outcomes, but because I think largely, maybe this is the difference, those better outcomes are essential to any hope of making decisions based on principle rather than on anything else. Because when folks feel like they're folks feel like they're hungry, whether it's right or not,
right?
Whether it's justified or not. I mean, because what the people of Germany say in 1930. I mean, it's not like these people were living in a third world country. They were still living in one of the most developed countries in the world, but they still had that myth, and I shouldn't say myth because it did have some economic problems, but myth of just being kind of downtrodden, and just like crushed by the world. It's like, no, it was not true. Life in the Weimar Republic, for all of its problems, was not so bad as people will sometimes say. But the fact is, it almost doesn't matter sometimes, because if people feel like they've lost something, they feel like they've lost economic opportunity or any of that. I mean, that it seems like folks are just all too quick to say, yeah, you know what, freedom's nice, but
I love that you kind of are bringing this topic up, because this was something I did want to bring up as well, was that we live in a time of unparalleled prosperity, not just in the world, but in America itself. You can look at the data. People talk about the disappearing middle class. It's like, guys, that's a good thing. They're disappearing into the upper class, guys. Like yes, the lower income, that's not moving up into the middle class as fast as we would like to see. Don't get me wrong. And I don't mean to say this in a way that dismisses people's real world concerns and real world issues. There are many people struggling in America, in all over the place. Let's not dismiss that. But as a whole, the human race, Americans themselves, we've never been better off, and yet we don't realize it. The perspective that we have has really, I don't know, how are we all comparing ourselves to the Kardashians, and we aren't successful unless we reach that level. What can we do? Because I feel like that's one of the things that we, Project Liberal, are trying to work on, is this countering this Doomerism. Yeah. That's really dangerous. It's a very dangerous thing. I think Trump was kind of an outflow of that, and Trump was a buffoon who didn't actually know how to get anything done. If he wasn't a buffoon, right? He made it worse. Right, exactly. Yeah. So, but like, what if somebody comes along that can tap into that Doomerist energy that is really truly threatening to just the American way of life, the liberal order that we have in this country? How do we fight that, just kind of that Doomerism that seems to just be everywhere right now?
Well, I will say one thing. It is very essentially important to ensure that our rivals overseas are not able to create a sense of feeling of inevitability that comes by, for example, being able to conquer countries and destroy democracies without consequence. Because one of the things that powered the feelings that democracy's time had come and gone in the United States in the 1930s was this feeling that, oh yes, these are the societies of the future, and they show that actually all of our values are nonsense.
And what's really crazy, Warren,
that's important.
That's what's happening now with the rise of Russia and China, and effectively, right? I mean, it's the same kind of thing. It's like this idea that these pseudo-fascist, these massive authoritarian governments can somehow rival us.
Yeah. It's very true. Now, we are fortunate, I say, in our time that our rivals are, Russia, which is, I think we'll all probably live to see Russia's final act, whenever that may be. It's not, it doesn't have a good future no matter what happens. I mean, I'm not saying I wish anybody ill. It just seems to be the case.
Russia and China are demographically fucked.
Well, I will say this. I don't know as much about China. It does seem like a bad picture demographically, but it also just seems it doesn't.
They're going to be under 1 billion people by the end of the century. Think about it. That's going to be that is a recipe for a disaster.
Yeah,
you worry about how that plays out, but go ahead. I'll let you speak.
Well, I would only say that I don't know. Maybe I should. Maybe this is just my own bias. I don't get the sense of the same raw, just hopelessness of Russia in China. I mean, China seems like this is a country that has achieved a lot in the last few decades, not by means we would like. I mean, some by means we would like, and certainly others not. But it's then some advance, some development. Many people have been pulled out of poverty. There have been real achievements there. I'm not saying it's because of communism, but
Right.
There's been achievements there. Russia has just been one tragedy after the next for a very long time.
I mean, yeah,
So it's sad. It's sad. But that's one thing, is that our rivals are not the German economy. And after the Nazis took over, it was fascinating. They just juiced it as fast as they could, on the assumption that we're going to have a war, and then we're going to have to pillage to keep this fire going. So when they annexed Czechoslovakia, for example, first thing they did was seize as much gold as they could, and try and remedy their economic situation. But anyway, so back then they were really, it wasn't too much better, I suppose. But Russia, you really got to be. It seems only like the most deranged are really looking at Russia and saying, "Oh yes, that is a model that I would like to emulate." And China, though this is not an honest and good way to judge future societies, China seems to have something in common with the fascist power of the 1930s that nobody was really looking at as a model for the future in the West, which is Japan. And that's something in common, is that they, it's not a country, European extraction. And so our right-wing fanatics don't look at it as a model to emulate for the most part, because, that seems to be the only real reason to me. Otherwise, it's just, every so often you'll hear somebody who does, like a Sohrab Ahmari, for example, who will post something, about this is why China is the country in the future or whatever. But for the most part, no, China is universally held as a threat. And I got to say, it seems to be that it's, I don't think anybody's looking at that as a trad life. And that seems to be the only,
As somebody who had a year or two where I ran through Russian literature, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, like we talk about Doomerism in America. Russia has a perpetual Doomerism that is wild to me. I don't understand it. Maybe it's just having to live so far north. But then again, Canadians don't feel that way, right?
Yeah, I mean, Russia. It's so no reason it had to be that way.
Right. Exactly. But I think China has a very different mentality, and they also, with China, they've liberalized their economy enough to a point where they have decreased poverty quite a bit. Whereas Russia, over the past 20 years, has really gone the opposite way.
Yeah.
Almost 2/3 of, it's like 60% of Russians depend on the state, either by being directly employed by the state, or by their welfare system, or any other means. They all depend on the state for their income. So that right there tells you how, like, that the government may not directly control the economy. They control the economy.
Yeah, it's wild, and it's unreal. Like, how what a different league they are really in. Like, you think about it sometimes. How insane is it really? Like, you ever bought something that was made in Russia? When's the last time you saw a Russian restaurant?
I mean, hey, there was Russian vodka on the shelf until
there was the one thing that we could all think of. Right now, that thing is that's gone. And
can't even find it anymore.
Right, it's like that and caviar, and it's not. I'm not saying this because this is a cultural argument. I'm saying this because it just is wild that this huge part of mankind in this country. Part of mankind is a part of Europe.
Massive natural resources.
Massive natural resources that, there's no reason that this, and also massive immigration from this country to the United States for decades. But of course, most of that immigration was people fleeing. So it's a little, I suppose it's a little different. It is just wild that by comparison, China, which certainly we've had a fraught relationship with at times in the past, and which this country has had a long history of racial difficulties as well. Nevertheless, Chinese culture, we all know Chinese culture at some base level, have all participated in some base level. Our houses are full of goods made in China, many of which they get better each year, and they're not always great, but they're quite good. So it's just wild that, like, here's the difference. This country that was just mired in just the most grinding poverty until basically our lifetimes.
Yep.
And then Russia, which has been a semi-developed country for quite a while. And it's just still just mired in just shit. It is so tragic. It's unbelievably tragic. And it's just like their future compared even to China, it just seems like there is just no future for a country like that in a world where demographics are generally already, populations are already going to be, slowing
I think
down.
it's like 6 million people have left Russia in the past decade.
It's just not trying to celebrate this because there's going to be a world after the war in Ukraine and all that, of course, and it's just it's not great. But that said, to your original question about Doomerism, I think one thing is important. It's just to talk about stuff like that. It's like, look, you want to talk about the United States, it's fine, but if you're going to go parading another model, okay, well, we need to have a talk. That's one thing. But more than that, I think. It seems like we need folks to be a little more aggressive about promoting the values and virtues of our own society, not just in the sense of saying, kind of, hey, look, everything's pretty good as it is, but also talking about why.
Yep.
Giving a little more historical context to it, really creating an emotional sort of connection to it, because it seems like we're in an age of, I guess, romanticism, where people are really looking for that emotional argument rather than just the rational argument, and that we've had that before, and this country thrived in that era. That was a pretty insane era. That's basically the period prior to the Civil War, but but there was a lot. There's just a huge to explain why I think this is something to think about. For example, religiosity in this country, which many people decry the loss of. It exploded during this period of time, not because, religiosity is some fixed quantity that started at 100 at the time of Jesus, and it's just only trickled down since. Yep. And it blossomed during this period of time. People founded new churches, discovered old churches again. They formed new community groups where there hadn't been any, engaged in a lot of civic activity, a lot of civic ritual that we participate in dates back to that time. It wasn't just something that George Washington decreed from on high. It arose organically. I think it's because there was a real sense of spirit and values, and that stuff people have to generate that organically. It's not going to come from the top down any more than it ever has.
And the United States remains a very religious country relative to some of its counterparts, and even more religious relative to a lot of these countries that these national conservatives idolize.
I think our church attendance is through the roof compared to Hungary, which is now the conservative.
Yeah, and yet we are very, we truly have a secular government. I mean, when it comes to how it approaches these issues, and it doesn't stifle religiosity to hurt that.
Well, I think there are a lot of folks who I sometimes wonder how much belief some folks really have in their own
bullshit.
Because you would think, even if a lot of those folks will say, well, the U.S. numbers are juiced. It's like, okay, hey, still, that doesn't change the fact that even if you cut them in half, it's still
go outside. I don't know how.
I'm in the Bible Belt South. Like, come on, guys.
Yeah,
you're gonna tell me that we're not very religious. Like, come on.
Go talk to somebody.
And they're talking about them in comparison to these ex-communist countries that just, they've had just the faith crushed out of them, and then they step into our own time where it just faiths have sort of fallen, I guess, somewhat out of fashion. And so it's like between and these are European countries that dealt with World War I, World War II, just real raw crises that we as Americans just don't really have, don't have an analog for. We just don't that's a continent of people that either were Nazi occupiers or were occupied by Nazis. And we just don't have anything like that.
Not only were you occupied by the Nazis, then half of the continent was then occupied by the Soviets.
Yeah, and then you get that. And some places, millions of people got both. And it's just like, well, so then these places, they're trying, I guess, Hungary is trying to be this, I guess, trad outpost of illiberal democracy, as Viktor Orban calls it. It's just wild to me to hear Americans say, yes, this is the country of the future, with the same sort of voice of a socialist talking about Cuba. It's, oh boy, like the paradise of Cuba.
Right. That's a great correlation. Yeah.
And what the other thing I don't get is those folks that never goes anywhere. It's not like the Fair Play for Cuba committee.
It's not like we're going to copy their constitution and replace ours, right?
Yeah, and it's just I think there's some there's some idea on the far right that the left has all this power and they've just conquered all our institutions. And as a result, we need to start using the force of the state to unwind that power, because otherwise we're never going to be able to. And that's why we need to look at a country like Hungary. And it's like, one, that's totally just not a comparable example in any way. But two, you're kind of looking at the issue the wrong way. Like, if people are losing faith in religion, it's not because the government's pushing them away from it.
That's right.
And it's not because the left has succeeded in convincing people that, boy, oh boy, it's a lot more fun to believe that when you die, nothing happens. You know, it's like, no, it's probably because for the last 40 years, we've had more involvement of church in the state, or at least attempts at such involvement. Churches have become politicized. Religion has become politicized. And as a result, people living in the here and now are much quicker to decide, look, I don't want to be involved in this institution that gives me vibes of these politics I don't like, I mean,
the quickest way to destroy credibility of religious institutions is to legislate the morals of those institutions and have those kind of things enforced violently.
Yeah. And then what do you get if you succeed? You get England, where the church has seats in parliament that mean nothing, and a church that itself is dying, which will only I'm not wishing harm on the Church of England. I wish them all the best, but it's like, if you want to look at what an established church is, well, that's the Church of England, a church which maintains some constitutional, they view their system as having a constitution. We, of course, in America know better, but
sure.
this church has constitutional authorities, some constitutional authority. It will always exist in some sense because it is a creature of the state. The monarch is the supreme governor and all that. But in terms of a real vital institution, like vitality, it's just seeping away. And I don't wish that to happen for them. I'm just saying that's what your established church is. It's not good for folks who really want a vibrant religious life.
Many of my ancestors, both Pilgrims and Huguenots, they fled established religion to practice their own religion. They came to America to be able to practice their own religion away from those established religions that now are apparently the standard by which we should look at. It seems to me that we tell ourselves a lot of these narratives, both kind of as institutions, as stories, and I feel like one of the narratives that's very important, even though it's twisted, it's true, it's false. Like, there's some true aspects, false aspects. Is just kind of the American dream. We don't know what that means anymore. We don't know what that that didn't mean everyone came here and got rich, right? It meant that people could be able to build a life for themselves.
Yeah,
that's still here. We still have that, but how do we change? Like, we hear all these other narratives going around about Hungary, about Russia, about all of these things. How do we start changing these narratives in our country to promote the positive narratives? Because the American dream is a positive narrative. It means, hey, pick yourselves up and build a life for yourself here. Now, that's harder for some people than it is for others, and we should absolutely be working on all of those things. But it's a positive narrative. How do we?
I find it
build those narratives up.
Warren, I'm curious as to what you think about that, but I just want to add something to that. I find it so odd to me because I've spent a lot of time in my work working in the international libertarian movement, talking to people from other countries. It almost seems like the American dream is more understood by people who aren't Americans now.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've had this experience, but I've talked to people in like Latin America and even some places in Europe, and they understand.
My entire life, I've worked with immigrants, legal and illegal, and trust me, they know it way better than we do.
It's still a beacon. Like, I don't think the world hates us as much as the Doomers in the United States believe that.
No, I mean, most America-hating people are all Americans.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, when I was in China, they said, "We don't hate you, we hate your government. We love Americans, we hate the American government."
Yeah, I mean, and it's Joe Biden went to Vietnam this week. And he went up on this pedestal in front of this big statue of Ho Chi Minh that previously they only invited other commie leaders to stand up in front of. It's like, it is this idea that like, even in a country like Vietnam, which, whatever you think of the war, might have some reasons to dislike the United States government.
Yeah.
I mean, folks are practical. I live in a, and not, they're not, you know, well, I guess that's a different situation, given that maybe not every country has another country next to it, like China has been trying to absorb it for the last 2,000 years or so. But in any event, I think that is a good point, talking about the American dream. How do people talk about a positive mission? I think that it seems like maybe one of the big differences I find, at least talking with immigrants and people from other countries who come here and express a sort of appreciation that sometimes Americans don't always. They just kind of remind me of people who take a lot of self-ownership in their life and who are really excited about the opportunity to be free to do something. And then they don't have an idea of what they want to do. You know, they're like, I want to do X, Y, and Z. You know? And there's not a lot of that. It doesn't seem like there's the same sense that some Americans have of, gosh, you know, I don't know what do I want my life to be about? What is it that, you know, we have a lot of freedom, and the challenge and the curse of a free society is that you then are left to derive some, you know, find some meaning, find a purpose. What is all of that? You know, it's a little easier. You know, one of the advantages, I suppose, of a country like, say, I don't know, I guess Orban's Hungary, or maybe one of these trad societies. I shouldn't speak about Orban's Hungary because I don't know so much about that. But maybe a country like, say, I don't know, the Soviet Union, maybe. You know, what your values, your purpose, all of that has already been decided. You know, you just decide whether you're in that or you're not. And if you're not, there are some problems. So there's some real incentives to at least mouth it along. You know, just kind of go with the flow there, you know. Mm-hmm. And they're, you know, true believers. If you're a true believer, there's a lot of benefit to that too. But here in a free society, we have to decide what our own lives are about. And we have to determine what has meaning. You know, we can't have meaning just given top down. And that does require fostering a real sense of self-ownership. And that can be tough, I feel like sometimes, because life is so good now that it's quite easy to, you know, put in relatively little and get a lot of enjoyment. I mean, like, you know, there is endless new content and entertainment for free at any time. It's easier than ever to make. We're all here doing it, right? And it's, I think, that's a challenge to get people to kind of really take a sense of self-ownership. Think what it is you want to do with your life, rather than just, you know, floating with the breeze. And, you know, when your sense of anxiety about life gets too hard, just kind of flip on a new YouTube video and stop thinking about it for a while, or a game or something. I mean, so I guess that's one of the challenges of modernity. You really got to foster a sense of self-ownership, because with that, you know, once you're really an active participant in your own life, then you want to be free of a lot of these things that people in other countries are coming here to get away from, get out from. You know, you want to be free to take an active role in your life, rather than this passive sort of identity that says, yes, I need to be shielded from all the forces of the world, all these big bad corporations. Of course, I love when they give me stuff. I want, you know, more product, please. But you know,
revenue, no.
Yeah, but they're trying to manipulate me. They're trying to screw me over. I can't be responsible for my choices. You know, my boss is out to get me. Everybody's out to get me. You know, the government's out to screw me over. I just need to be protected. I need to be insulated. Can't handle that stuff. No, I mean, you start to view things differently, from the sense of, I have an idea of what I want to do. I'm the author of my own life. And that's why, hey, you know, I see why maybe some people need some protections, but for me, that's restraint. You're getting in the way of what it is I want to do, because I want to create X, Y, or Z. I have an idea for a business. I have an idea for a project or a nonprofit or whatever it is you want to do. A church, like we were just talking about, whatever it is you want to do. I guess the laws are still pretty good for churches, but you know what I mean? You get the idea here.
Well, and Warren, you said it so well. That is the true dream of a liberal society. And one of the things that I think is the major criticism of liberalism in the modern world is this idea that liberal societies have no purpose. They have no vision, this nationalistic focus. And it feels to many of these like national conservatives and many on the far left that like it's unmoored and it's purposeless. And it's meandering and it doesn't go anywhere. Whereas you look at societies like, you know, China that has this national mission and it's inspiring. But what the truth is, you look at the last 300 years, the unmoored, meandering, seemingly purposeless.
Or let it be organic.
Organic nature of liberal societies have achieved far more.
Yeah.
than any of these societies that have come and gone with these national purposes. And it's so much more of a powerful force when you understand that way, how it relates back to human action. It goes back to the examples that you just gave, that those principles in of themselves create prosperity, create innovation, create the conditions for safety and security. And like those principles are so powerful, and it feels like people have forgotten about that right now.
But they also create the fundamentals for that sense of meaning, that sense of kind of self-ownership that provides meaning. Like,
but it's not centrally planned meaning.
Right. And they think that you can do this kind of top down. And so there are some examples. I mean, we talk about, I think, I don't know about you, but I feel like I always feel a little more comfortable talking about some of the Soviet Union, because it's always just like, there's so many clearly ridiculous examples of how central planning has failed.
Sure, yeah.
In practice. And how it seemed like, this was so ridiculous. How could it even have been in theory? Although, of course, at the time, nobody had tried, well, that's not quite fair to say. People tried central planning in the past, but a lot of these ideas were kind of comparatively new. So, hey, whatever. But now it's just so ridiculous. It's easy to now you see communists and they're like active degrowthers, and it's great because, hey, true, this is a philosophy that, it used to be saying this is the faster way to grow. It grew much more slowly, although it did, at least to its credit, grow. The Soviet Union continued to grow, just much slower. Now they're just straight up degrowthers, misanthropic. Global warming is the reason we need to switch to communism because it will mean less human progress. Okay, hey, yeah, whatever.
I mean, at least you're being more honest with your argument.
Right. But well, no, I mean, it used to be the case. I mean, I'd say my anti-communist credentials are clear. But in terms of human development, you could say, well, an Eastern Bloc country, at a certain level of economic development, is a better economic alternative than, say, a military junta might be. Like there were, now it's not a Western country, but it's not like the worst thing you could shoot for either. That's not, So you kind of get what I'm saying. Like you could envision in the past. I mean, hey, if you're a country that has no development, there are some things you could see in this model. But that time is come and gone. At a certain level of economic.
Well, I mean, for God's sakes, though,
really
we were in a space race with the USSR, right? I mean, so there was a time where they were real economic power.
And it seems to be the case that basically once you hit a certain level of economic complexity, which is not all that high, the benefits of central planning, such as they are completely gone. They're totally gone. Like Yugoslavia is kind of interesting to look at because this is a country that was basically totally destroyed in the war. And for about 20 years, they were able to get some real economic growth out of their brand of market socialism. And then it all slowed down and went to hell because at a certain point, it seems to be the case that after you do the very basic stuff, it doesn't work anymore. But,
prices are
surprise.
important.
Yes. Surprise. It turns out, yes, all of that stuff that comes with a moderately complex society. But, so now that's really just not an issue everywhere. Now it's just a disaster everywhere. So it's easy to talk about. But folks don't pay a lot of attention to kind of these right-wing utopias that have existed, in part because the ones we're most familiar with were destroyed in an apocalyptic war, right? And so it's easy to be like, yeah, that's obviously a disaster, Germany. But sometimes I think it's interesting to look at the ones that the braver among them will praise, like, say, Francoist Spain. Or I think Salazar's Portugal. And, you think this is a country that was not destroyed in a pocket. Well, I mean, the Spanish Civil War was a disaster. But I mean, after that, they didn't have another war. It kind of went on for several decades before it finally went belly up with the death of the Generalissimo. And were they able to preserve things? This whole movement of the right in Spain, trying to preserve tradition, fight modernity, create this, return to the past, as it were, in some ways. And it's more complex than I'm letting on. There were more factions on the right. There were straight fascists, conservatives, traditionalists, all that stuff. A little more complex than letting on. But were they able to at least protect basic conservative stuff like, say, the integrity of the church, the dignity of the worker? No. I mean, the church was just shredded by its association with this state to the point where now this is a country that regularly elects full-throated socialist governments where religious faith is certainly much lower than it is in the United States, a country which admittedly never has used fascist means. Well, at least rarely, I would say. I can't think of any examples, but it doesn't regularly use fascist means to defend state churches.
Yep.
It is this country, which used to be a much more religious society. I mean, it used to be much less inclined to things like divorce or abortion. All of this stuff. Spain is now, by every measure, a far more, I would say, at least a more socially progressive country than the United States, more economically progressive country than the United States. And this is a country that had 40 years of straight, unrequited right-wing dictatorship that was meant to turn the clock back on all this stuff. It just doesn't work because it turns out when you associate all of this stuff with your traditional values, you speed up the process of abandonment. And this is a result of people who are not willing to engage with their ideas in a competitive marketplace. Instead, they don't have confidence in their own ideas. They think they need to be protected by the full force of the state. And hey, some ideas do need to be protected by the force of the state. I was singing the praises of the military earlier, but when it comes to things that really animate people these days, culture, religion, faith, identity, that stuff, you can impose a tiny bit of it top down maybe, but for the most part, you have to build that stuff organically. You have to convince people, persuade people. And if you don't do that,
the argument I try to make with a lot of people who are anti-immigration is that the best way to spread American culture is to let people in. Because no one protects American culture or work ethic, family values more than immigrants. Like that is found in, if you want to spread it back to their home countries, this has been shown before that if immigrants that come to America, they send aid back. They let people know about, back home, the prosperity that's in the United States. I wanted to kind of go back a little bit here and talk about people and lack of purpose. And I think these are problems of modern times. These are good problems because 100, 200, 300 years ago, you just had to survive. Your goal was to survive. You're going into the woods, cutting down a forest just so you can plant food so that you can actually eat. Yeah. Now we don't have those problems. So, one of the reasons why I think we've seen some of the rise, especially among young men, some of these influencers, and this is something that I'd be curious of your thoughts on, is these trying to find a purpose, trying to find meaning in things. And these are extremely important questions. And I think that we as a modern society can actually start to answer them now that we don't have to just plant our own food, and gather the resources ourselves. We can actually create wealth and prosperity and have time to actually even think about these things. I think that, back in the 90s or back in the 50s, the average father, we made a meme, the average father worked 97,000 hours in their lifetime, whereas today that's down to 67. That is a huge decrease in how much time you have to spend working. And that doesn't even include household chores, which have been almost cut by a third. So we've got the time to think about these things. And that's, there are challenges that come up, that brings with that. So how do we start to answer these questions? And particularly, how do we, especially with young men seem to be the most impacted by kind of this lack of purpose, this lack of self, sense of self. Like, how do we start to address these questions?
That is a really good question. I have to say, it is difficult. It is a little tragic because I was thinking about that the other day. I was thinking, gosh, I had a great dad, he raised me up, gave me a sense of self-worth, a feeling of, wanting to be an active participant in my own life and all that. I mean, he wasn't really a political person. He just, Plinko chips fell the way they did, and he was a big part of that, I feel like. And I had, a lot of good things to say. Perhaps most importantly, do as I say, not as I do. He was very cognizant about, I really appreciate that sense of self-awareness. So I feel like I had a great dad. I feel like that's probably got to be the most important thing for a young man. I mean, that's the kind of thing, though. It's like, okay, so that's great. I chiefly benefited from somebody who happened to be in my life, who I don't have any control over that. So that doesn't really offer much to a lot of people. It's not like you can just go out and get a new dad very easily, And
there are very few policies I think you can make to make better dads.
No, I mean, a lot of people think gosh, that's the other tragedy of the National Conservative Project is that there are a lot of folks out there who think that we're not having kids because it's too expensive. But unfortunately, I mean, that holds up to a few moments of really kind of serious thought. I mean,
like every other country in the world has proven that.
Every country that gets rich has fewer kids, and every country that is poor has more, to the point where the poorest country in the world, I believe it was Niger. It may not be Niger. Niger, I believe is actually the correct pronunciation, but it may not be Niger right now. But in any event, it's around there. It has a birth rate of 7 or 8 children per woman by comparison to the 1 to 2 in the developed world. And so is it because, do people have high birth rates because they have a lot of money? It does seem to be the case that at a certain point on the income spectrum, the birth rate does go back up. Once you get to be, I think once you really start to be making, I don't know if it has to be millions of dollars, but
how much does Elon Musk skew that with his kids?
Well, right. It does not, as far as I know, it doesn't have to be millions of dollars, but it has to be, I think, at least a few $100,000 before you suddenly now have buying power to buy the services of other people to assist in the project of raising children. Yeah. So that to me suggests that the real challenge of our time when it comes to an issue like this is all going to get back to the question of men, I promise. I appreciate y'all being so open.
I'm enjoying it.
It's a great conversation.
This suggests that the problem is that people really prefer their time. And they are saying, I would love to have children, but it's just so goddamn expensive. It's like, well, maybe. But then again, it may be the case that actually people historically had children with much less income. They not historically, still do, still in the United States, still around the world. And whether you think that's a responsible decision or not, in terms of people's human priorities, we imagine other people in the world also have agency. It seems to be the case that once you have more money to spend on other things, more free time to do other things with, you suddenly decide, boy, gosh, there are all these other things I'd like to do. I'd like to go on this trip. I'd like to become this, that, or whatever. I'd like to work on myself. And all of that is heckin' cute and valid and good, but the challenge is that, now we're left with the old question of dealing with what is it that you value? What is your priority? And instead of that, we kind of get this narrative of, I want to have I feel like a sort of, I want to have my cake and eat it too sort of narrative where it's like, I would love to do that, but it's just so expensive. And that's like, in a sense, yeah, because, you can't afford the several servants, not servants, but, you can't afford.
You can't afford to go on the vacations anymore, right?
Right. Well, even if you could, it's the time that's the issue, right? It's the investment of time. Right? Because we want, we love our kids. We want to have good kids. We want to make the time with them count, right? But that does mean that you spend less time on other things. And that time is the ultimate fixed commodity, right? Even if we eliminate scarcity, we still have to deal with the scarcity of time. And that's a very hard thing to do, it seems like, in the modern world, until you get to a level of income that suggests really there's not a great solution to this problem. And people will do things like they'll fund healthcare or not healthcare. They'll fund very generous maternal or parental support benefits. And hey, there may be good reasons to do that for the sake of your values or something. But if you're doing that to increase the population, it just makes a tiny bit of difference, and it really doesn't do much of anything at all. Everywhere it seems to have been tried, and they've tried it in Russia and Hungary and France, and it always seems to have a very marginal benefit. There's this idea that we can use state power to kind of reverse these negative trends, and it seems to be the case that is just doesn't seem to match up with our revealed preferences. You can, if people want more time, and not a lot the government can do there.
Well, hey, they can make us all more poor.
Yeah, they can try that.
There you go.
That would make a difference. But then again, the other challenge too that makes this such a difficult one to grapple.
They do a great job at that too, by the way.
Yeah. The other challenge with this is that now this is a problem that isn't just a kind of a rich country problem, really, because birth control is also very affordable. And whatever people say about their values and ethics, it's something that they want. They want control over when these momentous things happen. So there's just nothing you can be able to do with that. And we have now seen that as you try and restrict access to this sort of stuff, all that happens is people have less sex. So, because it turns out now we're so advanced as a little monkey with our monkey brains that we found things that are often more compelling. Maybe they should or shouldn't be, but now there are just so many ways to spend your time. Now it is more important than ever that you persuade. I think in the past, just we maybe don't realize just how much of life was sort of slotted out for us. Maybe not in oppressive ways, but just like, what else you can do? I'm 30. In the year 1950, what else am I gonna do with my life? I mean, it's time to have some kids. What am I gonna do? There's only 3 channels, and they're all over at 9:30. I mean, I gotta, some point, now you have the world ahead of you. You have to make those choices, and that's tough. So that's to say that there's not much that the state can do with these problems. I feel like so that gets us to men, and that's really tough, I think, for men, because men have such a they have that sense of wanting to provide. In a free society, your role as a provider remains important, but in a different way. It's not that you are essential for survival, because it's possible for a woman to work and support herself. I shouldn't say possible, like it's a rare thing, and it's common. Yeah. And it's not you're not essential in the sense of I have to work or we're all going to starve. It's more like I have to work so we can have a good standard of living to do the other things we want to do, like go on vacations or realize some other ambition, But if you're not conscious about that, maybe it just feels like, God, we work these jobs and then we just blow our money on consumer goods that we don't even really want. And that's just the end of it, So there's a challenge of, I think, again, trying to really facilitate that sense of self-ownership, that without that, I think that a lot of the benefits of our age can be lost. If you're just kind of buying, like that sense of I'm just buying things just means nothing. I mean, it's just, I suppose if you're not really thinking about what it is you really want, what really makes you happy, if you're just kind of floating from dopamine hit to dopamine hit, that is a challenge of our time. It doesn't mean that we're not prosperous. It doesn't mean that we should change what's available to people. But I think in the past it may have been a little easier because so much less was available to people. Yep.
Your choices does have its benefits. Right. Not that we should go back to it.
Right.
But
so there are, that's the thing. Like if you don't have, like, did you guys hear this? Shoe on Head is one of my favorite posters, not because I really agree with very much of what she says, but because she's very much a master of her craft that just knows how to just drive engagement. She's just a master of that. And she posted one recently about this study that said that men would prefer electrical shocks to sitting in a room quietly with their own thoughts.
I saw that.
This one, I think this one was real, but I mean, we've heard permutations of this for a very long time, And I mean, it's true. It is so goddamn hard to just sit there and just think, what do I want out of my life?
Yeah.
What am I doing? Have I made the right choices? I mean, heaven forbid if you haven't made all the right choices, because then you got to think about that.
Yep.
And
it's easier to follow the dopamine hits.
Right. I got to think about mortality. I mean, I only have so many hours in this world. I got to make that. How do I make the best use of them? These are hard questions to grapple with, and I am not sure what drives people to do it, because I got to say, sometimes I worry that maybe one of the challenges of our time is that it's just easier to just sort of go on autopilot and just kind of.
Well, and I think you're onto something, because when I really think about that, I mean, sure, we were less prosperous. We maybe had less in the 50s, for example. Yeah. There was, and based on which demographic group we're talking about, way worse for other people. The standard American, white male, whatever. They may have had less, they may have been poorer. That drove them in ways to do things like have children, which having children is a very rewarding thing to do. It changes your life. In a way, it also kind of introduces agency in an indirect way. Yeah. But it's like nowadays,
children give you purpose for the next 18 years or for every kid, right?
Exactly.
So it helps give you a purpose.
Whereas now it's just a lot easier to the default state, right? If you're following the dopamine, is to just stick into the matrix. And,
But what the other challenge with that is, though, that things like, for example, having a child, like that is what Brian Kaplan did this. I never read it, but I've heard a lot of praise for this book. I think The Selfish Case for Children is something to that effect. And he says, look, your children are not necessarily going to make you happier, but your grandchildren certifiably will in a way that benefits your life in such a massive capacity that it is literally in your self-interest to have as many kids as you can. That is scientific. I have proven that that is the way to have the most meaningful life possible. All this and that.
I believe that.
We'll take it for, we'll dispute that because I don't have any reason to dispute that. So just taking that for granted. Keep in mind though, like what a leap of faith this is to say, look, okay, I'm gonna have a child, and just try and think about this like maybe an ordinary person would. Maybe they wouldn't want to concede to it. Okay, well, first of all, heaven forbid, I'm going to have a healthy child. We're not going to have a child where the rest of my life is going to be defined by their health problems. I mean, maybe I'll find some meaning in that along the way, but at first that is a terrifying prospect. Yeah. Okay, so that's one. We're going to have a healthy birth. We're not going to have a sort of a life-changing event that makes a permanent trauma or a trauma for the rest of my life. That's one. Two, I guess I've got to decide that I'm at the point where I'm ready to take on an 18-year commitment, right? I haven't now. Many people find the idea of commitments for any length of time very difficult. Yeah. And now here's one that is not just 18 years, but by the way, increasingly, here's something that probably doesn't help the situation. I don't imagine it's a big decision driver, but I mean, the state's role in children. If you screw up, you let your kid walk to school by themselves, we might arrest you. I mean, it's possible. I don't know how much of that really factors into decision making, but I'm sure it makes the whole thing over a little tougher than it would otherwise be. So you're taking on a big commitment. You're asking people to do a lot, and you're saying basically, okay, but huge meaning rewards, serious reward in terms of meaning and purpose, and it changes your life. I totally believe that, and yet I also recognize as somebody who's not yet on the other side. I mean, I hope one day to be, have some kids of my own, but I recognize. I agree, but I also recognize there's no reason. Why would you ever tell me anything else? You probably feel like a terrible person.
It's horrible having kids.
You can't. Yeah, who's gonna say that?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, so it's a big decision, and it's an example of the kinds of decisions that now people in free societies are left with. It in the past they just didn't have it all because eventually what birth control you had would fail if you even had it.
Yeah.
Right. You needed people to help out on the farm. You needed a retirement plan. There's so many things. You needed the children for poor things.
Yes, you needed. Yeah, there was huge. One of the tragedies of our time we don't have more child labor. I'm kidding, but seriously, there are it is not a functional thing anymore. Yes. You're not doing this for functional reasons. Right. You're doing this for emotional satisfaction and for the the joy of creating a new life and raising and
not being alone on your deathbed.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, these are not simple things. They're not just like I guess this is just the time to do it. I don't have anything else to do. Like say, in the past, it's a tougher choice, and I think that's emblematic of a lot of the problems that afflict men today. Like, how do I find meaning and purpose in my life? Well, gosh, I guess in the past you've seen the memes of men used to be fighting wars and all that, and we think about oh gosh, that's terrible. Isn't it nice that we live in a world that's more peaceful? And it's like, well, that's true, But I will say, there's probably a serious and extreme sense of satisfaction, purpose that comes with, have you guys ever seen, you guys I'm sure know a little bit about Napoleon, for example, right? Yeah. I mean, this guy, he's defeated in 1814. He's exiled to this island off the coast of Italy. After 9 months after the King of France is restored, Napoleon comes back with a couple of soldiers and raises an army purely on force of personality for the purpose of taking down the king. And it almost works. All of Europe, again, has to come back and stop him for this. And at this point, this guy has made so many disastrous mistakes. So many people have been killed. Hundreds of thousands of people have died. So many people died that France was, I think, the only country in Europe that didn't have a population boom in the 19th century, which later had some serious consequences. It was, I'm not an expert in France, but it's what I've heard. And yet, this guy offered such a clarity of purpose, vision, follow me to greatness. Just men were just like, yeah, I will. Hell, I'll join you. We'll march to Paris together. That is something that I often on Twitter will mock and laugh at. But there's also a kernel of something too that's hard to create in a society where you say, create your own purpose.
Yeah,
do your own thing.
Sure.
That's what I do. What if you just don't wanna? You just want somebody to give it to you.
Yeah,
that's tough. We got to figure out how to deal with that.
Yeah, I recently read Cult Mind Control by Steve Hassan, and he talks about how cults, what they'll often do is they will try to get you to replace your personality with a cult personality. So you adopt the practices, adopt the way to speak, act, talk, and so they get people into these cult mentalities of acting like the group and being one with the group. And exactly what you said with Napoleon. People buy into this vision. They've replaced their identity with this other identity that's out there, that somebody's been showing them this vision of this identity that they can be a part of. And I see that in a lot of smaller ways now with influencers today, getting people to adopt these identities, adopt these things. And I do, back to the original question, how do we fix it? How do we give people how do we get people to really to break free from those things, to create a positive identity of themselves? That's going to be, I think that's going to be the question for a long time. I don't know that there's a single answer. Yeah.
Well, I think it's sort of a combination of saying, well, here, kind of, what's your alternative? And we are fortunate, I suppose, in our time that, and by the way, to be clear, I'm just to give some credit to Napoleon. I don't want to say that those folks didn't have agency. They weren't, but you just, you imagine that the sort of meaning that comes from being told you are on a crusade to liberate the world of kings and emperors, irrespective of the fact that I just declared myself emperor. I mean, whatever. But just the rhetorical power. It is hard to say the idea of self-authorship up against something even approaching that. That can be tough because it's just what a rush that must have been, at least until you got a cannonball to the face. Such a rush. So I'm not trying to sell short of saying it, exactly like it's even that a lot of the stuff was cult-like mentality. Just that group mentality, there was something really powerful to that.
Yeah.
And it is tough to match that on a purely individual basis. The alternative, I guess, is to create voluntary groups. But voluntary groups themselves are a challenge. It can be hard to, without the means of coercion sometimes, to create something quite so compelling. A cult that were purely voluntary perhaps would not be so much of a cult, right? Yeah. But that said, I think it's a combination of presenting the one of the things we're fortunate about in our time is that in terms of alternatives, all the alternatives to a liberal society basically don't have any vigor in them. Liberal society, we talk about all the challenges of liberal society, but nobody else really has seriously proposed an alternative model. It's all just folks talking about reanimated versions of far older or far more discredited ideas. Mm-hmm. And they basically sort of all seem to share this hope that, look, if we can just sort of smash this one up enough with a hammer, that will create breathing space for new ideas. But the truth is that these new ideas are not likely forthcoming because, at least I don't really believe that politics is something that's driven by innovation in a way that's something else. It's sort of a response to circumstances. And this seems so far still be the best response to the circumstances of the human condition, liberal democracy. Everything else seems to be worse, and nobody wants it. Even if they maybe don't like this, they never affirmatively want the other thing. And that's why even Russia and China still ape the structures of a democratic system. They still talk about how they are more democratic, in fact. But the truth is, the folks out there who argue, actually, we should have less freedom, less democracy, very rarely will they do that openly. And that just shows that the ideas that they have no vigor, really. All they have, as far as vigor, is saying, look at the expectations you have for your society. Well, in practice, it has delivered less than those expectations. So we are fortunate enough that's basically the alternative. Is somebody saying you're a hypocrite and your society doesn't work as well as you say it should or would or whatever. In the past, people were like, hey, here are some new ideas that we should try. Now there are no new ideas. All the new ideas are just permutations and regurgitations of things that have already been tried, like national conservatism is basically just the same right-wing stuff, hard-boiled and repackaged in a way that, at least for the moment, isn't usually straight fascism, which basically we'll get there in time. We're still going to have elections, but they're going to be different because only good people will run in these elections. It's just the same stuff as always, Yeah. So we are fortunate we don't have those vibrant alternatives. There still is no real alternative. Like when Francis Fukuyama, who's often memed about now, said that, it wasn't that he was saying that everybody's just going to become a liberal. It was that, I shouldn't quote Francis Fukuyama here, but I think that the gist of the idea, as I understand it, is that it's not that there aren't alternatives. It's that there aren't alternatives with vigor. So it's not that we're all destined to become liberal democracies, but it is that that's the only thing people are building toward. Nobody is building toward anything else. They are only trying to destroy this in the hope that something else can be maybe done at some point in the future. And it just never. So that's a good thing we've got. And highlighting that, I think, is important. The other thing is to really, I think, try and inculcate a sense of self-ownership and trying to tell people that, look, there is no way to meaning and happiness except to try and do the hard work of creating it for yourself. And failing that, I think we have to figure out ways to make it. We have to figure out ways to deal with the problem of that large part of mankind that is like, I want somebody to give me something to believe in. I don't really know what the answer to that is because, I've heard people say things like, 30% of the population is just generally just inclined toward authoritarianism. Hell, I don't know. I don't really have a lot to offer on that. Except, if you have a sort of, that's a challenge, I'm not saying that's definitely true, but I've kind of read that that's a challenge. It's just authoritarianism is kind of a mindset that like any other.
I think that the idea that we have to control others to a certain degree is just kind of innate.
Yeah.
To a certain degree.
Yeah.
And remember, liberalism is brand spanking new. In the grand scheme of human history, we've had 250 years where we just had, for the first 100-ish years of America's existence, we were the only ones.
Yeah.
It really was a liberal-ish government. I wouldn't even call it. I wouldn't say that we were even pure liberal. Even today, we aren't even pure liberal at all.
I will say, I think another challenge that we have is that we don't grapple, I think, honestly, with history or usefully with history. We do so in ways that I think they seem to rob it of some of its vigor. Like, for example, one of the things I realized that I would always do in the past is I would say, for all its faults, America, for all its problems, for all its challenges. And I feel like in practice, we should just stop saying stuff like that because nobody who you can reach cares, and nobody who cares is reachable.
And everybody
for all its flaws, for all this, despite that, fuck that. Nobody cares who is the people who are highlighting that stuff at this point in the year of our Lord 2023, who are saying the United States is just a fundamentally broken society. Those people are in practice. It is now, I think, clear to me that is an argument people are never making in good faith, that the purpose of that argument is the same as the national conservatism stuff that I was talking about. Their point is to try and demolish as much of what exists in the hope that maybe then their ideas, which are not popular at all, and which are boiled over versions of old tyrannies of one flavor or another, will have a chance to flourish. And that's why they want to tear down this country or other countries too. This happens in Britain, which gets it maybe worse than most countries because of the legacy of empire. People trash every institution there. I mean, those poor bastards, they can't even post a picture of their breakfast without somebody dogpiling. It doesn't look good to me, but I mean, they must like it. But, so this is the problem. I think we need to have more vigorous defense of our institutions from a sort of pride perspective. God, I mean, just imagine the romance of somebody like George Washington in 1776 fighting against the most powerful empire in the world, really, perhaps in the history of the world at that time.
Yes.
It only went on to become more powerful, in fact. It's a massive enterprise. fighting against one of the most established ideas in the world of hereditary authoritarian monarchy, fighting on the edge of the known world against that, some of the longest odds in the world for the chance to be the author of his own life. Just as a sample, or to preserve, rather, because people back then, many of the leaders of the revolution were, they had already had, I guess, what we traditionally call the rights of Englishmen, and they wanted to preserve those, from encroaching monarchical power. That's ultimately, that's what it was about, right? The right to preserve the freedom to be the author of your own life. And instead of focusing on all the bad, because the bad is not remarkable, right? The bad in human history is, for the most part, it's everywhere, and it's unremarkable. I mean, you got to get real bad. You got to get Nazi Germany bad before you are especially remarkably bad. Bad is pretty common. It's the good that is not, and it's those exceptions to the rule that should really be highlighted.
We need to judge people not just. Clearly, we need to have caveats, and when we talk about the founding fathers and we should talk about their flaws. Yeah. But they made a step forward that had never been seen. Yeah. And we has impacted the world in a positive way. If the revolution had failed, can you imagine what the world picture would look like today? I have a hard time imagining exactly what that would look like. Yeah. But I can guarantee you it's a lot worse than what it looks like today. Far less free.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of course, there are those who are, well, you see, we'd be better off because we wouldn't really know what we had lost, and we still would not have lost.
We wouldn't have had the war in Vietnam if America had.
There you go. Yeah, it's like people in the UK. I shouldn't say people in the UK. Very few people say anything as deranged as this, but they'll say something like, "Well, the Revolutionary War was sort of a mistake because they have the NHS."
Canada's not that bad.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's what it's all about. The world that we created, the world that developed from that point on. Yes, it is defined primarily by the difference in health systems. Like, no, man, it's really worth, I think, and I don't have a lot to say for people in other countries because I don't have their historical experience. So I'm not an expert in that. I imagine there's something similar to think about for folks abroad, but at least here, I mean. How much pride must one be able to take in knowing that the ideas that set forth the thriving of the modern world in large part got their start here? I mean, people in Europe had been writing about them, but they hadn't been able to really put them into practice until the United States got started. And then that spark was lit, and then it expanded and expanded and expanded. I mean, there's really a lot there to find romantic and to take pride in. And for people who just are constantly just focusing on the bad, at this point, I have to say it must be obvious that the only people who are served by that are the people who are trying to destroy everything good in your life. Yeah. Every authoritarian, everyone who wants you to be poor for your own good, those are the only people who benefit. Because at the end, as one of these trial attorneys, a professor of mine in law school used to say, when the plaintiff's lawyer would say, we need this and this much money for the damage you've done, he would come up and say, look, money ain't gonna bring him back. Money ain't gonna bring him back. He would say, the damage has been done, all right, and that's a tragedy. But the fact is that the damage that is being done now is not by the past so much as the people who are trying to use the past now. I mean, that's not without exception. But when people are talking about things like the Revolutionary War, the Founding Fathers, the damage that was done is not the issue now. What is the issue now is the damage that people are trying to do, particularly those forces, I guess, animated by Russia and China, but really authoritarians all over the world, are trying to do is they're trying to leverage hypocrisy and inconsistency for the purpose of convincing you to give up your own freedom for the sake of some sort of imagined moral clarity that, of course, no other society has a moral record any better than ours, and often much worse. So, be proud, unabashedly proud, not in ignorant fashion, like, say, after 9/11, we had a lot of ignorant, stupid freedom fries pride, but, a justifiable, qualified sense of pride in who you are and in being a part of an incredible project, a group community, a nation dedicated to the prospect or the project of individual flourishing. I mean, that's got to be at least as good as, Hungarian nationalism.
Yeah,
whining like a fucking bitch over the Treaty of Trianon 100 years later. No offense to Hungary boos out there. I got nothing against Hungary. A valued NATO ally when Viktor Orban is not mucking things up. But I mean, come on. If you're an American and you're looking at these places for inspiration, it's like these communists who want to talk about Lenin and Stalin and won't even give somebody like fucking Eugene V. Debs a chance. An American socialist. They have no interest in that stuff. They just want this romantic nonsense that has no applicability abroad. It offers nothing. If you want, So that's, I guess, my idea maybe for a sense of identity is maybe a renewed sort of unashamed, intellectually qualified, but not constantly tripping over itself to prove that it's, good and decent and caring and thinking about all this stuff. Just says, no, America is freedom, is good, and there's value and virtue in that because it allows you to be the author of your own life, to transcend misery that has defined the human condition everywhere and always in the past. Here's a chance to do something else. This is a project worth being a part of, worth contributing to, worth identifying with, and worth defending. There's something.
That
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I think we're over our target time. So I think that I couldn't have chosen a better way to kind of encapsulate the conversation. I mean, effectively, that's a lot of the motivations behind what we're doing with Project Liberal. We want to be guided by that true optimism and that mindset, like that bring people back to the true values that like made the society great, because we believe that they're not dead. They can make society great in the future. And fighting the central planners of culture and the central planners in government, by showing clearly that the ideas, even though they feel unmoored and unguided, can lead us to a better life. I really loved your commentary on self-ownership and really the importance of that. That is so critical. A lot of people don't really think about that. We need more voices that are advocating for it.
So much of our society and so much of our discourse is talking about tearing things down, tearing other people down, tearing institutions down. Sometimes we need to tear institutions and ideas and things down. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. But we have to be able to build things up. And America gave us a hell of a foundation to build things up on.
Yeah.
Our founding fathers really built a foundation that we can build on and we can improve on. And there are plenty of improvements to be had. Yeah. But we can build on those things. We can build on these ideas. And like you said, the way that they've spread around the world, I mean, it's not universal, but it's hard to imagine in 3 or 4 more generations that these ideas won't spread, because there's just an innate human desire. We talked about innate human desire to control other people, but there's also an innate human desire to be free. Wow. And you can't be free if you're trying to control everyone else.
Well, that is a challenge, I think, sometimes to appreciate, is because, of course, like that wasn't always true. That when we say, I think it's true that everybody wants to be free, to be able to shape their own life in at least whatever capacity they'd like to. Maybe not everybody has the same desire to make all the decisions that maybe other people want to make, but they want to make some decisions. But at the same time, freedom, certainly in the United States, like the one I was just praising at first, was I want the freedom to author my own life, and of course, obviously, the lives of all the people who I control. Not just slavery, but family, children, poor, whatever, right? So that idea is like it's never like perfect and unfinished, but the fact is you do start from something, you shape it, prove, and I mean we've now seen several alternatives of basically we're literally going to burn it all down and start over, and it's kind of like I watched this incredible YouTube series like on the French Revolution. I mean, this isn't the only thing I've learned or read about the French Revolution. This is just the most recent one. It was kind of fun. I was listening to this while I was cleaning out my garage this weekend. Like 34 parts of like an hour each. It's the most insane thing that somebody just is making this just for fun, because they were great. They were fantastically researched. They only had like 4,000 or 5,000 views. So it's not like this person was making it for money. You're just doing it because they like doing it. Maybe hopefully someday I get some money. I don't even remember his name, tragically enough, but French Revolution. Just search like part 34 or something, you'll find the one. And it's just like, yeah, they tried to destroy everything. Not at first. At first, they were like, yeah, we're gonna keep king. We're gonna, they tried to do something that sounded very American for a variety of reasons. It just didn't pan out that way. And so it eventually got to the point where they did try to destroy everything, all the religion. We're going to have cult of the supreme being, and the state's going to have full unmitigated power to make people into better people. And it just didn't work. It just ended up the same thing. You basically got, instead of you have the all-powerful King Louis, you have the even more all-powerful Emperor Napoleon, who admittedly was more competent than any of the Bourbon monarchs, but that's not what the revolution wasn't. We want to have a more competent, all-powerful leader, right? And it's the same with the Soviets. I mean, certainly Stalin was far and away more competent than Tsar Nicholas, but that wasn't what the whole thing was about. It wasn't millions of lives lost over 30 years of struggle and misery so that we could trade out Tsar Nicholas for somebody with even more power. That's what destroying everything gets you. If you have the moral courage to say, hey, let's grapple with things in a real way and think about, like, what can we improve upon? Well, you can make some real progress, but it does require a little moral courage, because it does feel like a lot easier to just say, nah, I'm morally pure, burn it all.
Right.
Who cares about the consequences? And of course, the people who say that typically do not suffer the consequences as directly. Although, to be fair, at least Robespierre got his head cut off at the end of it. So there is justice in this world.
What a great way to cap it. So I don't know if you guys have anything else to add, but since we're at about hour 45, I think it is time to wind it down. Do you guys have anything else you want to comment on or maybe plug?
One thing I love the Hold the Course poster in the back.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites from the Neoliberal project there. Let me see if I can get the camera.
There we go.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Reaction Revolution.
I love how you have it.
Yeah, and I
didn't see that was in the background.
Yeah, thank you. I do want to be clear. I think that the right in a developed country is somewhat more dangerous than left at baseline, because the right is able to take power in modern societies through violent force or through the ballot box and build authoritarian societies in a way the left has not yet been able to. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it seems like it is just the left has not been able to take a developed country and then turn it into a socialist dictatorship. The closest I think of socialism is the British Labour Party. Maybe they were able to get something really like state planning in place, but even that went to hell. So that collapsed. So I do think that I don't want to say everything is equally the same. In my opinion, I think there is a difference, and I do think at baseline, I mean, even though I don't like Bernie Sanders' politics, I find him less threatening to the institutions at a baseline than, say, Donald Trump. But that said, I do believe that the problems are common. And frankly, I think the biggest thing the DNC has going for it is that Trump happened to the Republicans before some figure like that could happen to them. And so now they have the benefit of being able to say, we're against that. Loss aversion is easier than...
Listen, my favorite thing about Democrats is that they're not Republicans, and my favorite thing about Republicans is that they're not Democrats.
Yeah. So I'm not trying to say that everything is the same. I'm not trying to both sides things. I do acknowledge there are problems on both sides, though. So I do want to make that clear. But since the poster, it sort of implies that it's the same both ways. I think broadly speaking, intellectually, the challenges are the same. In the United States today, and I'd say probably in developed countries, I think the risk on the right is slightly, I'd say, demonstrably higher. But it's not to say that there's not risk from the left, because of course, the left's greatest problem is that it can wreck things up so bad that it creates great conditions for the right to really wreck things up.
That's a really good point. That honestly feels like also another topic for a whole nother conversation, because that alone, I feel like we could talk about for 2 hours.
Thanks for letting me go on and ramble.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. Do you have any plugs you want to throw at the audience before we leave?
I haven't been doing much streaming lately, but I am always on Twitter at twitter.com/everydaywarren and
X.com now.
X.com, yes. Yes. It's not just
I can't do it. I can't say it. I can't.
It's not a name that rolls off the tongue. That's the problem. Even if
go give Warren a follow at Everyday Warren on X, and make sure he gets that sweet X revenue that he's going to be bringing in this week. I'll wrap us up there since we're at an hour 50. This was the Project Liberal Show. We'll be back probably within 2 weeks with another episode. I appreciate everyone's time. Thanks again, Warren. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thanks for having me. It's so much fun talking with y'all. I really appreciate everything you do, and it's a lot of fun talking with you.
We'll try to have you back soon.
I know.
Thanks again. See you guys.